So let's now go to our panel. Still with us, White House reporter Mary Alice Parks, Darrell Blocker, former deputy director of the Counterterrorism Center of the CIA, senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez, and former deputy assistant secretary of defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy. And Darrell, let me go to you since we were talking before the State Department briefing a while ago. Appreciate you sticking around. On that last point that Chris Costa was making, which is that this is going to continue. And in fact, the problem of counterterrorism has been made more difficult by what we've seen over the last 10 days, 2 weeks, that around the world, the worst people have been inspired. Look, you can take on the United States and you can bloody them. Do you think we're in a more dangerous situation right now?
I do not. Not from the Taliban. The Taliban is never projected outside of the Pakistan-Afghanistan area. Now, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, they're coming after us. It's nothing new. They've been coming after us since the World Trade Center bombing failed attempt in 1993. I do want to touch very, very quickly on the fact that what we're doing with the Taliban is no different than what we had to do in Yemen with the Yemenis, what we had to do in Libya with the Libyan groups who were not our friends and were not on our side, but had mutually agreeable, mutually attainable goals for that moment in time. So the Taliban is helping us to the best of their ability. They have demonstrated over the last 18 months that their folks will not attack us if they don't tell us to attack us. But now they're caught between the Americans and getting us out and ISIS, who's also trying to make a point.
And I was in that, covered that civil war in Libya, and there were no good guys to be seen outside the downtown areas of those cities. So, Mick Mulroy, let me ask you, our troops at the airport in Kabul right now, they're taking maximum force protection measures after the White House warned another attack on the airport is, quote, likely. So how concerned are you? What can they do? What do those protection measures entail?
Yeah, so I'm very concerned. I mean, we've already seen that they have both the capability and the willingness to attack our forces, and that the Taliban is either unwilling or incapable of providing that outside the perimeter security to prevent it from happening. Right now, we have a serious issue of desperation with American citizens and SIV holders trying to get on the airport as they know this essentially the clock is running down. And they are in a very vulnerable position. They are in large groups, and they're essentially surrounding the gate. So it is very concerning, and let's just hope we can get as many people as we can on the airport safely in the time remaining.
And if I could just follow up with you on the question that we've now heard both Darrell and Chris Costa answer, which is, do you think this last 10 days, 2 weeks, has made the terrorist threat greater to people in the United States?
So I agree with my good friend Darrell and a former colleague at the agency that the Taliban itself isn't necessarily a threat to the United States, but I do think that when it comes to the jihadists around the world, they're going to view this as a victory for their ideology. The U.S. is leaving Afghanistan. We decided not to leave residual force. We're already seeing a terrorist group operating there. They've proven they've had a willingness to attack the United States. So if they develop the capability, they being ISIS Khorasan, if they develop the capability to attack us in our homeland, I think they have proven they're willing to do that. So we're going to have to develop as they keep saying, over-the-horizon capability to conduct CT operations in Afghanistan, and I think that's going to be the main effort going forward.
All right, Louis Martinez, at the Pentagon, officials now believe there was only one bombing outside the airport. We reported yesterday there were two. There was no explosion, it seems, near the Barron Hotel there, as early reports indicated. What does that tell you about the situation on the ground and how chaotic it is?
No, that is the right word, Terry. It was chaotic, and we all know in covering the Pentagon, they always talk about the fog of war. They always talk about initial reports not always being correct, and in this case, it appears that was the situation. The Barron Hotel, for context, as we saw on the map there, very close to the Abbey Gate. Remember, there was a mass of people there, so maybe it extended as far back as to the Barron Hotel. But it's worth pointing out that what they did tell us this morning at a Pentagon briefing was that there was one individual who detonated a suicide vest, injured hundreds of people, killed more than 170 Afghan civilians, and as we know now, killed 13 American service members and injured up to 20 American service members. They said here at the Pentagon this morning that that individual detonated because he got close to the location where these service members were, but they were still investigating the exact details. And we heard from the briefing earlier just now with John Kirby that they're trying to figure out the ground truth. But there's also the report that there were gunmen, multiple gunmen, who were firing at the crowd after that explosion from an unknown location. They don't know exactly what happened to those gunmen after they opened fire on the crowd. We're learning more, but still many details remain to be made public about that tragic situation yesterday, a tragic attack that has really just exposed how dangerous this really is. We all knew it was going to be a dangerous situation. We heard from Ned Price talking about that. We heard from the spokesman at the Pentagon earlier today talking about how dangerous it is. General McKenzie talking about it yesterday from CENTCOM, talking about how these Marines, these soldiers have to go up close, have to physically pat down these Afghan civilians who want to be evacuated. So that is a perilous job. They were doing it. They had to be exposed. But we are now told that there are multiple security enhancements that have been put in place because, as you heard from Jen Psaki at the White House briefing, the president's national security advisors told him this morning that it is very likely that there will be another terrorist attack in Kabul.
And yesterday, almost 200 people killed by that one bomber and the follow-on firing, as Louis points out. Mary Alice, let me go to you on the top Republican in the House, Kevin McCarthy. He says there's now going to be a, quote, reckoning, unquote, of the president's decision to pull troops from Afghanistan, saying, quote, every option's on the table. Kevin McCarthy saying every option's on the table. What's he talking about?
Well, Terry, he's in the minority, so I'm not completely sure what options he thinks at this point he has, but wouldn't be surprised if it was only Republicans, but Democrats too, who are going to want a reckoning and answers about this. Not only about the attack yesterday, both Republicans and Democrats are going to want so much more information about what security measures were in place, what the failings were, what happened, why service members were so vulnerable. But they're going to want investigations, large-scale investigations, as to why we ended up in this mission in particular. There's longer standing questions about whether the Bagram airfield should have been given up so early, whether so many troops should have been pulled out so early, whether evacuation should have started earlier. These questions we've been grappling with the last week. Congress is going to want answers. And so far we've seen this administration not willing to engage in that kind of looking back. They say it's easy to critique from the outside when you're not the one making the decisions. They're in emergency response mode. They're not in the kind of sort of frame of mind where they're doing kind of that retrospective work. But I would not be surprised if it was Democrats as well as Republicans that want answers to these big questions.
Yeah, and thanks, Mary Alice. And Daryl, I just wonder, people might be asking one of those questions, is Afghanistan a harder place now, a more dangerous place now because of the president's decision to pull out, supported by a wide majority of the American people? But is it now more dangerous seen for the United States?
I think it's more dangerous probably in the next 6 weeks, between now and the 31st and 30 to 45 days after that, then as things start to settle. But in terms of a threat to the homeland, that's the way an intelligence officer is looking at it. I do not think the president's decision that was made, whether it was made when he got into office or while they were planning, is going to make it any more dangerous to the homeland.
And that is the number one concern of the president, obviously, and Americans. So Mick, it's early days. But what are the lessons from this vivid and extravagant disaster that has played out in front of the American people over the last couple of weeks? What lessons can we learn?
Well, I mean, there'll definitely be a review. I don't want to get involved in the politics because I'm not a political person, but I wouldn't use the term reckoning. But there's always going to be a review of major foreign policy decisions, and this is obviously one of them. The question of whether we should have kept residual force in the United States, or excuse me, in Afghanistan, I think was one that we should have, but that decision has been made. The question of whether we should have kept control of security around Kabul as we did this evacuation, I think we should have, but that is going to be asked. We are in the situation where we are, and I think the U.S. military, the State Department, and all of the volunteers that are trying to get SIV holders and American citizens out really deserve to be acknowledged and recognized for that effort. We're going to do, I'm sure, the best we can to complete this mission without losing any more casualties, be they Americans or Afghans, innocent Afghans. But this situation is going to be reviewed and should be.
Here and in other countries, no doubt. So, Luis Martinez, we learned this morning that just before the attack, a group of Afghanistan veterans launched a final mission to bring hundreds of at-risk Afghan troops and their families to safety. You've reported that. What can you tell us about it?
That's right. This was a group called the Task Force Pineapple, and they had put together an attempt to get out hundreds of coworkers, of colleagues that had fought with them or had worked with them in aid projects in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, an effort called Pineapple Express, modeled on the Underground Express from the Civil War, the effort being getting people through the checkpoints last night. Obviously a very complicated effort being directed from the United States, using GPS pin drops, using contacts over the phones, instructing people from here, again, in the United States, over there, outside the airport in Kabul, to specific gates, them going in groups of 1 or 2 or 3 to try to get there to those locations so they could show the appropriate identification that would get them inside Kabul's airport and through those security checkpoints. And that effort continued all the way through up until the bomb blast that we saw. It happened yesterday afternoon local time in Kabul. And this was a highly organized effort from former special operators. Those are people who worked in special operations, people who worked in intelligence gathering, people who worked with aid groups. They had all come together informally, as Congressman Pfluger had talked about, into this very grassroots effort because they wanted to help these individuals that were there, still remaining in Afghanistan, and who were under threat from the Taliban. And so it's a highly coordinated effort that could only have happened, Terry, given the modern technology that is available to us today, that enables us to remain in contact with people half a world away. And it's really remarkable to think about that somebody here in the United States could use a pin drop using GPS and telling someone over there in Kabul, this is where you need to go. Let's maintain constant communications. This is where you're going to get to. This is who you're going to see. This is the item that you're going to hold up that will clear you to get past the checkpoints. Truly remarkable effort. And we're talking about several hundred people, again, that were cleared through, entered the security checkpoints at Kabul, and were able to make it through up until that point of the bomb blast. It's unclear if some of the others who they were trying to get out suffered as casualties, but this was pretty much an extraordinary effort that's getting a lot of attention.
It's an amazing story and a rare good news story. And it does say, as you point out, just how times have changed. I was in Afghanistan almost 20 years ago, covered the first escalator opening in the city of Kabul. People came to it almost as a tourist attraction. Now they are able, with the assistance of Task Force Pineapple, these veterans, to find their way to the airport via cell phone. So, Mary Alice, a different subject. I want to turn to some other breaking news here. We've heard just a while ago, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has released an unclassified report on the origins of the coronavirus. That was something the president had asked for. The report says the virus was not developed as a biological weapon, but it doesn't come to a lot of other conclusions. What can you tell us about it?
exactly that there's not a lot of data. You hear the intelligence community in this short, about 2-page unclassified report say that most elements of the intelligence community think that this was most likely from a small-scale engagement with an animal. Basically, what we've talked about before, the idea that this pandemic began because of a jump from this virus from an animal species to human, but that there was at least one element of the international intelligence community that thought, the American intelligence community, that thought that it was still possible that this was developed in a Chinese lab. Now, the unclassified report does say that there's not evidence that this was developed as a weapon, but it goes on to say that they just need more cooperation from the Chinese, and that it would be impossible for the Americans or the larger international community to really ever understand the origins of COVID-19, which is so crucial to preventing such a pandemic happening again, unless the Chinese are willing to be equal partners in this and let the international community specifically look at those early cases of the virus and any data or DNA related to those early cases.
And pretty much the entire international community, including the World Health Organization, asking China to be more transparent, to come clean about the early days of this pandemic. For the safety of all of us, it doesn't look like that's going to happen, which may itself be a piece of evidence. Mary Alice Parks, Darrell Blocker, Louis Martinez, and Mick Mulray, thanks very much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.